Or maybe we'll come to that after you have some general comments.
Yes, I would like to start off on a more general point than history, and that is that I very much understand and appreciate your whole idea of mutually looking at each other, and I also fully understand the point that if you're going to have a mutual conversation, a mutually respectful conversation, you have to understand the person from a different tradition with whom you are having your conversation. But I have one problem with this book, that it seems to me that mutual conversation, mutual respect should lead to mutual enrichment.
Yes.
And my problem is that as a Christian, as basically a Westerner, although I've lived so many years in this country, I don't see you giving really any space to the way that we have been brought up and the way we think.
Okay, this is a very important point. So this leads to the history issue, perhaps, because the central idea that I'm bringing out is what I call history centrism, which, just to give an overview, is the approach to history that God intervened in unique, absolute ways. These are non-negotiable. If we were to not accept these historical interventions as they have been taught, then we really have no other recourse. So the historicity of certain events becomes non-negotiable. So this point of view is what I call history centrism, and I make the case, I think, convincingly, or at least I hope, that the Abrahamic traditions tend to be history-centric, or at least far more so than the Indian traditions. Now, the issue I have with history-centrism is it won't allow an alternative approach which says I am a good person, like Gandhi, but I am not part of that history-centrism. But if the person is living a good life and believes in spirituality and is very good to human beings, but is not part of that history centrism, then the attitude of Christians, at least the clergy, not all theologians but many of them, has been that this won't do. In other words, unless you accept the historicity of the various claims as being true, just being a good person and believing in that there's one divine and living a good life is not good enough.
Well, you see, I think that perhaps that is not allowing sufficient room for modern thinking among Christians, not allowing sufficient room perhaps for developments. When I was young, yes, definitely, we tended to be brought up to believe that in St. John's Gospel it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and therefore that means that there is only one way. But actually, it never says that in the Gospel. It just says, I am the way. So there is a way, in other words. Perhaps it would be better if it said a way from your point of view. But we do admit as Christians now, at least many of us do, that if you place too much stress on the historical Jesus, you do end up in a position where it's difficult to have religious pluralism.
Correct.
But it was an Anglican bishop who said to me that he felt that religious pluralism was the greatest problem facing Christianity.
Who was he?
So he was the Bishop of Kingston when he came out to India.
Okay.
And incidentally, when you talk about religious respect, it was very interesting because this conversation, this remark of his came out in the course of a conversation with Maulana Wahiduddin, who is a great Islamic scholar. And when the Maulana was asked about religious pluralism, he said words to the effect, I believe Islam is true, but I respect, and he used the word respect, all other religions. Now, of course, the big question in that is respect.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
Are they legitimate?
Well, now, again, what does the word legitimate mean?
Okay.
You see, one of the interesting things, but first of all, let me just say one other thing to you. I do admit this problem about historic century, but I do think that a religion with history as part of its theology, does have some relevance, particularly towards the whole question of evolution. Because if we are evolving, then it's quite possible, in my view, that during that evolution there may be events of particular importance in the evolution of our thinking.
Yes.
Secondly, I do believe that the historic centre, we do have to be absolutely certain that we say this is not the only way to God, and I would say that absolutely, definitely. Lastly, one other thing about it, and then I'll give you a shout.
Sure, all right.
Is this, that seems to me that in some ways you have a historic history in Hinduism,
yes,
with Krishna's remark in,
yes,
in the Gita about
yes,
he will come,
yes,
when he's needed.
Yes. Okay. Now, the fact that the Bishop of Canterbury,
Kingston, yeah,
said that one of the problems facing Christianity is this history-centrism.
Well, is religious pluralism.
Is religious pluralism.
Yeah.
But he did not diagnose it as history-centrism.
No,
he said that there is a symptom called lack of pluralism. I'm diagnosing that symptom and referring to the underlying cause as history-centrism.
I think the word, I can't remember the word he used, but I think he was talking about something slightly broader than history-centrism.
Okay.
The overall exclusivity of Christianity.
Yes.
The sort of exclusivity which at one stage, but
yes,
no longer,
yes,
led the Catholic Church to say there is no salvation outside the Church.
Right.
That sort of exclusivity.
So if the lack of exclusivity, of course, that translates to lack of pluralism, the exclusivity leads to lack of pluralism, then my philosophical question is what causes the exclusivity? And my claim is that there can be only one true history in a history-centric tradition, and that is the cause of exclusivity. So if I'm trying to diagnose what causes the exclusivity, I reach at the doorstep of history-centrism. And I'll give one example and would like your comment on it. The status of Jesus is not agreed upon between Muslims and Christians, because being Son of God is very important to Christianity, and just downgrading him as another prophet is not acceptable. And the reason it is not acceptable is because there is original sin, and this original sin condemns all humanity because of what Adam and Eve did. It condemns all humanity, to all progeny, to eternal damnation. Now, the only way to repair this condition, because God feels sorry for people, wants to repair the condition, is to incarnate the Son of God, and through his sacrifice allow a way to redeem the original sin. And this is the Nicene Creed. What is the Nicene Creed? Which is a required belief of all the Christian denominations. I've gone and talked to many denominations and asked them, is the Nicene Creed, a belief that is required? And pretty much everyone has said, yes, that is what is required. So the history-centrism is encoded in the Nicene Creed. Now, the virgin birth becomes important, because if he did not have a virgin birth, then he would also be born sinner, because he would also be a progeny of Adam and Eve. And since all progeny of Adam and Eve are condemned to eternal damnation, Jesus by birth would be a sinner. And to prevent that from happening, he's the only person ever born who is not progeny of Adam and Eve because of virgin birth. So since he is God's progeny and not progeny from Adam and Eve, therefore he does not have the same condition that the rest of us have. Now this is an extraordinary statement, an extraordinary belief, and a profound belief. And therefore the Muslims removing that he's Son of God and the virgin birth, and saying we love him and respect him, most serious Christian theologians will say that won't cut it, because you undermine the whole system, in a sense. Now, this is an example of history-centrism versus history-centrism. And now, to give you the flip side, if Muhammad is in fact the final prophet and supersedes the teachings of Jesus while respecting Jesus, but saying you are running on Windows 7 and we have got Windows 8. So it's more recent. That's sort of the Islamic argument. That not that Windows 7 was bad, but we have a more recent version, and therefore everybody should upgrade to it. Now, if you take if you want to validate that, the Muslims have to not accept Jesus as the one Son of God, because a Son of God cannot be superseded by a regular prophet. So he has to be brought down or brought to the level of a prophet, a great one, a very extraordinary one, but still just a prophet. So for Islam to work, Jesus' virgin birth and Jesus' being Son of God cannot be upheld. Otherwise, the prophet cannot really supersede Jesus. And for Christianity to work, that one requirement that he is Son of God and had virgin birth cannot be compromised. So you have two systems of history centrism, whose exclusivity comes by virtue of this requirement.
But you see, I'm not sure that you're right on the virgin birth.
Okay.
That is one interpretation of the virgin birth.
Okay.
I was recently in the church in Eastbourne, dedicated to St. Mary the Virgin,
Okay.
and the priest at Christmas time preached a sermon saying he didn't believe in the virgin birth.
Okay.
One of the great debates, you see, Christianity isn't quite as written in stone, I don't believe,
Yes.
as I think with respect you imply. And as you know from the early history of the church, has been marked by debates about
Yes.
the exact humanity of Jesus
And Mary.
the exact, much more importantly, the exact divinity of Jesus and the exact humanity of Jesus. You know, people have been debating, there have been huge controversies, heresies, councils of the church, because, but nowadays, more and more, Christian theologians, I think, are saying that, or at least lots of them are saying that, you know, we can't be totally precise about these things. Son of God is another thing. Tomes of books have been written as to exactly what Son of God means, and also don't forget the term Son of Man, which is frequently used in the Gospels.
Yes.
You know, on top of which, I think I would go back to what I said that with the Bishop of Kingston, that I notice in general, even in the Roman Catholic Church, that there is a striving towards making Christianity more capable of living with other religions. As I said to you the other day, you know, there's been a wonderful book by Father Jacques Dupuis, a Jesuit, an interesting...
I ordered it already after you told me.
Well, now, don't you think it's a good book?
I'm going to it's coming.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Raimundo Pornicer wrote a lot about these things. Also.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, he wrote about the Jesus of Hinduism, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
So there is this effort to go, and therefore, in a sense, if I come back to my original point, what we should be trying to do, I think, is not point a finger at Christianity
I understand.
for being historic-centric.
Yes. But to understand ourselves, each of us, a little better as a starting point, I think is a good idea. Now, I am aware that Christianity has been internally debated from its beginning.
Yeah.
But there is the prevailing group and then the dissenting group. In any power structure, there is a center, and then there's people who are sort of shouting from the sides, and they are considered heretics, and they are, some of the mystics are persecuted. So, if you look at the trajectory of the power structure, would you agree that for the majority of its history, the trajectory of the power structure, not all thinkers necessarily in compliance, but the trajectory of the power structure has been this exclusivity of the historicity?
Yes, if you put it like that, I suppose I would find it difficult to argue with that. But after all, what we're talking about is having a discussion in the early 21st century.
Where things have changed.
And yes, and the whole point of our discussion and your book and many other discussions is
how to move forward.
How to move forward.
Yes,
you see.
I want to get to that.
One other thing I would say is that whilst, yes, I would argue that on the whole the exclusivity has been central to the teachings of the Church, and there has been the whole missionary enterprise, and there was the second Bishop of Calcutta, the famous Bishop Heber, who in one of his hymns talked about the heathen in their blindness bow down to stick and stone. There has been all that. But equally, of course, there have been very absolutist statements of Hinduism.
Yes,
as well.
yes. And they are also history-centric, and I
Yes.
criticize them too.
Yes.
I consider that turning Hinduism into a linear chronology of history and claiming an absolute historicity of that is a Semitization of Hinduism. And I mentioned that, and I critique that also.
Yeah, you do. You mentioned that in your book.
Yes. Now, a point I want to make is that in this research, I looked at the official websites of most major denominations of Christianity. And in the tab called definition, they always mention the Nicene Creed. Always, every one of them. That these 4 or 5 articles of belief, which are all history-centric, are the mandatory requirements of membership. And the Nicene Creed is actually recited in many rituals, in many ceremonies.
Yeah, we recite it every time we celebrate Holy Communion, both in the Anglican
Yes.
and I'm pretty sure in the Roman Catholic
In the Roman Catholic Church. But now, so I think that the Nicene Creed as an encapsulation of history-centrism has been there, continues to be there, at least in the United States. I think maybe Europe is a little less Christian, intense, maybe the more liberal, But in the United States, which is what the book is focused on, I would say that they are exceedingly history-centric. And the interesting thing is that the Protestants tend to be even more so. Now, the engagement with Hinduism and Vedanta from the Christian side, with Father B. Griffiths and many others, and Raimundo Parniker, if you look at the list of Christian thinkers who have engaged with the attitude of let's see what we can learn and what we can adapt and adopt, it has rarely been a Protestant. Maybe Anglicans are an exception. But the mainline Protestants...
We regard ourselves as Catholics.
Yes, theologically.
Yes.
Theologically, you are Catholics.
Yes, yes. And I could just say one thing as well there. I think one of the reasons why, and this is a very important point relating to what I was saying before, one of the reasons why you would think the Protestants are more historic-centric is because obviously they don't have that same doctrine of the Church that the Roman Catholics have. And the Roman Catholic doctrine of the Church is a doctrine which gives the Church a power. In your book you suggest perhaps that the revelation comes entirely from the Bible, but of course in the Roman Catholic Church the revelation also comes, the revelation comes from it as well.
Yes.
The doctrine, the teachings come from the Church as well, and people even like Cardinal Newman, the famous British convert from Anglicanism to Roman Catholicism, who was only recently beatified, I think it was, by the Pope when he came to Britain. Cardinal Newman has a whole lot in his thinking about the development of doctrine. So once again, we're not set in stone in quite the way that I think you
Yes,
suggest.
I think Catholicism has been more flexible than Protestantism in general. Would you say so? Not with the exception of the Anglican.
Well, of course, in a way, it's
if you look at Baptists, Southern Baptists, you look at Methodists, they're very fixed in their idea.
Yes, I would. I would. I think I would agree with you. I wouldn't like to I don't want to say anything against any of my fellow Christians.
But here's an interesting thing, Mark. When I talk to serious church people from the Southern Baptist Church, Methodist Church, and I describe my term, they haven't heard of this term history-centrism, and they feel a little odd or uncomfortable. But the substance of it, they say, you got it. You really got it. It isn't true. This is the only historicity that ever happened. And this is important to know. And people who are being liberal and flexible and kind of, they haven't understood it. They are mixing it up. So in other words, that camp of the church, which is very powerful in the United States, I mean, they elect presidents, and they are very powerful. They would say that this liberal thinker that you're referring to is not authentic. That's sort of their claim. And they happen to have the clout, the power to propagate and be in the school systems and control the White House and all kinds of things. I would say certainly the religious right in the United States, which comprises a very large number, are history-centric without even apologizing. I mean, certainly the Christian Zionists who believe that not only is the past absolute and exclusive, but even the future and the end of time and all of that is determined. So don't think that calling them history-centric is a problem for them. They think that somebody finally got it. And they have, their problem is the Hindu guru, which I'll come to in a moment, who goes around saying that we are the same. And they can't stand it. Because they're saying we're not the same, because we are talking about the historicity, and you are making trivializing it. And so their view of a very liberal Anglican or Catholic would be exactly that. That you're sort of playing games and you don't understand the boundaries, and this is right. Like Billy Graham wouldn't agree with a non-history centric view. And Billy Graham says inaugurated more presidents, every president, the whole inauguration, and he's sort of the head of Christianity, American Christianity in a figure. So if you look at him and the mainstream Protestant churches as sort of the voice of Christianity, then the very liberal cutting-edge people that you're referring to are not in the power structure, in America at least.
No, I think
that's sad. That is sad.
I think, again, to say for my own church, the Anglican Church, the Episcopalian Church in America, there are some very liberal thinkers, and of course some of them are so liberal that they're threatening to create a schism within the church.
Yes.
But what I would say to that is two things. I would say, yes, but that doesn't carry our discussion any further forward.
It gives you a base point. And it gives you a
well, yes, in a way, yes. But the other thing I would say, of course, is that, as you have yourself said, a hugely powerful, perhaps the most powerful body of Hinduism in this country, powerful in the same way as you talk about the American Christians and their power, is in fact, as you rightly said, a historiocentric, Semitized version of Hinduism.
Yes. Now, the Semitized Hinduism, I think, is a recent phenomenon. The history-centric version of Hinduism is a more recent political movement. Would you agree? That it is not something.
But it goes back further than the BJP and the Jan Sangh.
But it's still in terms of the long period of Hinduism, it's still relatively a short kind of a thing.
I would. Yeah, I mean this particular version of it. Yes. Whether there have been earlier versions, I don't know.
Because we've always had this idea that there's many paths and then there's this avatar, but somebody else can be an avatar. So even if you tell a Vaishnavite, I've talked to some of the really kind of the ones you would consider very solidly history-centric Krishna people, Krishna bhakts. That what if somebody a Native American comes to you and says, we have a story of God visiting us, and it's a totally independent story, and almost every one of them has said, I have no reason to refute it, because God may well have said that. So that means that while I believe in the historicity of Krishna, that doesn't mean that it's an exclusivity claim. You see, the exclusivity claim doesn't arise because there is no condition equivalent to original sin which has to be redeemed, which only can be redeemed once by one Son of God. That condition, the starting point is different.
But